coming up on the Knowledge Industry Podcast.
Your competitor is Netflix. Your competitor is whoever else has your target customer's eyeballs. And if you're not producing content that is of at least reasonably comparable quality to the type of content that they're used to consuming on an ongoing basis, then you're not going to have their eyeballs for that long.
So today's topic, whatever the platform, whatever the format, how do you make content that your audience wants to consume? My guest is David Bain. He's a podcast industry veteran and has an extensive background in digital marketing training. At the moment, he runs Casting Cred, a modern B2B content marketing agency that specializes in podcasts, YouTube, books, and live stream launches.
Do you sell online courses or run live workshops? Do you have expertise that can help people in life or business? Are you even running an online training empire from your kitchen table? Then you're part of the knowledge industry, a fast-growing industry that means that you can learn almost anything, and anyone can create a business around what's between their ears. Welcome to the Knowledge Industry Podcast with your host, Mark Egan.
So David, thank you for sparing a bit of time for me. Where exactly in the world are you right now?
Great to be with here with you, Mark. Now, I'm in Cambridgeshire. I'm in my little home office here in Cambridgeshire in the UK. But I wanted to say, actually, I'm in the same room as you are, because our backgrounds are exactly the same, aren't they?
Yeah, it looks almost identical, doesn't it? And it's really strange because we were literally just before I press record speaking, and it turns out we used to live virtually where we could see each other's houses, yeah. And we never knew. So I think we're destined to make contact in this way. Now, reading up a bit about you, and obviously you've written books and you've done various things, and, you know, some of your history goes back to, I know some people say, I've been on the internet a long time, but, you know, you've been doing this, you know, this marketing stuff for a really long time in internet years. If we were to go back, what's the start of your story? Where does it all begin?
Yeah, I know I only look 21, but I've been involved online for quite a while. Start of my online story is probably about 98, 99 or so, where I became aware of the fact that there's an opportunity to get rich online. And it took me about 5 years or so to figure out how to build a website, how to start publishing, and how to derive a passive income. So it took me until about 2004 or so, but then I figured out things like Google AdSense and ranking number one on Google for different keyword terms, and generating almost a full-time income by then online.
And I mean, if we were to, I will come back obviously to parts of your story, but fast forward, you know, you've gone through digital marketing, you've worked with some huge brands. Now, obviously, you're doing lots of work in the podcasting field. One of the common themes seems to be with what you've done is, how do you get the right message in front of the right audience in a way that they would want to engage? Would that be fair? That's the kind of your speciality in a sense.
I think it's taken me an awful long time to get to that stage, or at least even think of that stage. I think that when I first started producing online training programs back in about 2007, my desire was just to share all the information that I've got, because I had figured out how to, as I said, rank pages high on Google and get a fair amount of traffic from that. And when I went to various business networking events back in 2006 or so, everyone was asking me, wow, how do you actually do that? And I figured out, well, actually, why don't I produce a course that shows people how to do that? So by 2007, I had produced a course. I was delivering it. I'd recorded it on video, and I'd published it on YouTube as well. But my way of doing things was simply sharing as much information as possible without being aware of what makes a good learning experience. And excuse me, and it's taken me probably about 13, 14 years to really hone teaching or conveying information into something that's a little bit more memorable. So instead of actually sharing as much as possible, sharing some kind of model that people can remember and apply their own circumstances to, and hopefully because of that, utilize that more successfully and more often in the future.
So let's embarrass you for a second here then. Going back to those, and look, we've all done it, where it's just a splurge of information. What if I were to have consumed one of your courses back in those days, compared to if I consumed one today? What would be the main difference in your approach? How have you made your training more engaging, more effective?
Sure. So my first course that I delivered was called The 13 Pillars of Internet Marketing, as it was called back then. You can actually search that on YouTube. That's the only piece of negative constructive feedback I received. I received lots of positive feedback, but some great constructive feedback was, okay, what do we do now? So I'm thinking, okay, I've got to give people a plan. So then I changed the course into what I call the 26-week digital marketing plan. And I spent the whole day delivering, this is what you do in week 1, week 2, and just stepped people through everything and gave them so much information. And I think people were fairly stunned, perhaps in a good way, perhaps in a bad way. But it took me to realize, after that, I ended up being in other digital marketing roles myself. So I was head of digital marketing in a few organizations. I ran digital marketing training in different organizations, and I honed slowly the fact that what actually is at the back of an effective marketing / digital marketing training course or campaign, it's all about content. So then I thought, okay, is there a model out there? Is there a content marketing model out there that I can use as the pivot point, as the center of the courses that I'm developing? And this was probably back about 2015 or so. And I was thinking, okay, what content marketing models exist? And the model that I liked was the Hero Help Hub model by Google / YouTube. And I didn't think it was complete, as in I didn't think it could apply to every type of content in digital. So I tweaked it a little bit, ended up adding a fourth H to it that I called Heart, because I didn't think that it's really described product type content. So just to give a brief summary of those 3 types of content, Hub content is more episodic type content that you'd maybe find in a podcast or a YouTube show. Hero content is your incredible, big, splashy piece of content that you'd perhaps spend more money on. It could be longer. It would certainly have greater style, greater production value, and be more likely to be the first piece of content that people engage with your brand. And then your help content to answer the types of questions that your audience would likely to have about your type of industry. So if you can be there answering the questions, they're more likely to remember your brand and do business with you. But I didn't think there was that piece of content that described product-centric content, i.e., this is the sales page, this is what the product is, do you want to come and buy it? So I called that content heart content. So I used this 4H model at the center of the various marketing courses that I designed at the time. And it really helped because digital marketing, as you know, Mark, changes all the time. There are different mediums that work more effectively. But if you can have a model that you provide to people, that even if digital marketing changes completely, or the different mediums that they use to publish content, to market their business on changes, then they can take this model and they can still find it useful 2 or 3 years down in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, a few things you mentioned there. One, people like a roadmap. So they don't just want a bunch of information. They're asking for your perspective, your insights, your expertise. So take me on a journey. And also, what you were saying about things changing. One thing I always think is that we tend to come from the technology and the platforms and then work backwards very often. But if you think about it, people generally don't change. The things that trigger people, their needs, their whatever, it sometimes just has to appear in a different format and for, in a different structure, maybe for a different platform. But, certain underpinning values will continue to work because people are people. Now, you've obviously, like I said, you've had an agency, you've worked with all sorts of different organizations and businesses. When it comes to people actually trying to sell their wares, and again, even with something like online courses, there are so many people with great online courses, and the missing bit of the jigsaw is actually putting it in front of an audience that wants to buy it. What do you see as the most common things that people get wrong when it comes to their content marketing?
If you go back 10 years, then all you had to do really was hit publish. There wasn't enough competition out there. If you got your SEO, your content reasonably well done, then people would find it. And you could quite easily, within a few days, get hundreds, if not thousands, of eyeballs on your content. It's not like that anymore. Everyone is doing the same thing in terms of publishing content. So you have to get a little bit more honed in your ability to publish quality content, relevant content, to know that you're really trying to target and publish content that's appropriate for the right audience, and you're publishing high quality content. And that high quality content comes in different forms. I like to say that your competitor isn't who you think it is. Your competitor isn't the other company out there that sells the same blue widgets that you do. Your competitor is Netflix. Your competitor is whoever else has your target customers' eyeballs. And if you're not producing content that is of at least reasonably comparable quality to the type of content that they're used to consuming on an ongoing basis, then you're not going to have their eyeballs for that long. So to me, quality content just comes down to starting at the very beginning. Video is paramount nowadays. So many people want to consume content in video form. But to me, the starting point for creating great video is great audio. So you have to start with your message, obviously, and what you're trying to convey, and what your content marketing model is, exactly what stage in the buying journey your target consumer is. But then once you decide that, precisely what you're trying to deliver at each stage in the buyer journey, it's all about the quality of the content, and that's a combination between what you say and how you say it.
And on that point about how you say it, I mean, if you're thinking about nowadays, I used to work in television at the BBC, and then you had kind of a captive audience, didn't you? People sit down, they had a few channels to flick through, but generally you had a bit of time to get them interested in a particular program. Whereas now you've got somebody swiping on Instagram, and to kind of get that attention, because, Netflix, everything else, everybody who's posting is really difficult. And, what have you noticed? What kind of things work if, somebody's posting a video on something like Instagram? How do you get attention? How do you get somebody stop and consume your video?
I think the key thing is, don't try to be everywhere. You don't have to grab your consumer's attention until it's the most appropriate point for you. I mean, I've purposely not engaged that much with Instagram or TikTok or different social networks. I'm a lot more active on LinkedIn and Twitter, for example. And I may use paid advertising on Facebook as well. And it's about high quality content rather than the frequency of the content that you publish. I think a lot of people, maybe using LinkedIn as an example, post on a regular basis, but don't necessarily post high quality content. And I think in general, LinkedIn's algorithm will keep your post where it has reasonable organic reach for at least a week if it's engaged with, if it's really appreciated by your target audience. LinkedIn will let you post a video for up to 10 minutes long. Perhaps you should consider the format of it, i.e. have it 1:1 instead of 16:9, having captions on there, and you can do things like have a link, but have a link in the first comment as opposed to directly within the post is there, and then perhaps link it up with other marketing activities that you're doing. In other words, if you've published a great social post, then why not tell the rest of your audience about it? So perhaps even restrict yourself to interacting on one social network, but then telling all of your audience about it. So if you've got an email list, and then you've got a behind-the-scenes video that you've shared on LinkedIn, tell your email list, link to the LinkedIn post as soon as you've published it, and that's going to trip LinkedIn's algorithm a little bit. If they see lots of views, lots of comments, interactions, likes, as soon as it's been published, then you're more likely to drive that slightly long-term organic reach from it.
Right. So, the message you mentioned a few times there is it's not about just posting lots and lots of rubbish. It's about quality, and rather post less frequently, but post something worthwhile than just post for the sake of it. And that brings me on to my next question, bringing things up to date with you. One platform or one format, which if you're trying to build connection is very good, is podcasting. So at the end of the day, all of this is about connection with people, isn't it? Can you connect with somebody, inspire them, educate them, build trust, build a relationship, all that kind of thing. And podcasting is great for that. So tell us about what you're doing now and why you decided to go further in on podcasting.
Sure. I got involved with podcasting, launched my own podcast in 2006, but I was inconsistent with publishing, and I didn't really fully embrace it until 2014 when I launched Digital Marketing Radio. And that was quite successful for me fairly quickly. I got up to something like 20,000 downloads a month and a lot of interaction. But back then, you had about 200,000 podcasts available on Apple Podcasts, or iTunes as it was called back then. Nowadays, you've got well over 2 million podcasts, and it's more challenging to get instant organic success again. And with that, so you've got to you've got to bring together the different mediums, and if you've got that email list or people in other places, then tell people about your podcast when you launch. I think podcasting is, as you say, a wonderful medium for building that community, but also engaging with people on a very personal basis. People have their headphones in, people are wondering about doing something different, but often listening to you on an hour plus basis, and there's no other medium like that where people are listening to what you're hearing and really feeling that you're talking to them for that kind of period of time. I remember a quote from Terry Wogan when someone said to Terry, "You've got 9 million listeners in the morning," and Terry said, "No, I've got one listener." And he really understood that he was speaking to that one listener. I think podcasting's like that. It's an exceptionally personal medium. And if you can speak to people in the singular and imagine someone just walking about, just doing something, some work around the house or whatever they're doing when they're listening to you in the podcast, but that they're perceiving that you're having that personal conversation with them. So that's probably the most effective way to deliver a podcast. But a podcast is a wonderful way of keeping a brand top of mind as well. I work with a lot of B2B brands, and quite often their sales cycles are very long, more than a year long. And you're never going to keep someone actively wanting to hear sales messages for a year. Someone might engage with your website or subscribe to your email list to begin with, but not be ready to consider a purchase quite yet. But if they can subscribe to your podcast and you deliver great, pertinent, relevant, engaging content that isn't sales orientated, but is educational or funny and relevant for your target market, it's a wonderful way just to keep your brand subtly top of mind so that when they are ready to make that purchase, they'll come back to you.
And am I right in saying, it doesn't always have to be even on the topic that your business or service is directly connected to? Because, coming back to the thing I was saying at the beginning, your kind of zone of genius in a sense is figuring out what connects with that particular audience, giving them content they want, but with purpose. So can you give us any examples of maybe unusual matches for topics for podcasts that businesses have used?
Sure, yeah. I work with clients that I produce podcasts for them that do things like encourage the target audience to get into the industry. So I work quite a lot in the legal sector. So you're talking about how to actually build a career or start a career in that particular sector. And that's interesting. And that's not quite, core topic in terms of what's right for someone to buy the particular service. But I think a better example of what you're asking is there was an attorney/lawyer based in the States, and they had to think about their target market and talk to their target market, and actually found out that 70% of the target market were really passionate about golf. And they decided to start a podcast about golf. And it was really successful because quite often with legal services, you're only going to need them maybe once every 5 years or so. So it's not exactly something that you want to educate yourself about. You simply want to go to the person that's qualified in that area, use their service, and then forget about it. So you don't want to be educated about legal services, really, unless you're starting a career in that area. But if you're passionate about golf and you listen to a golf podcast, and this golf podcast is brought to you by the legal firm, then the brand's top of mind to the right target market. So when they're ready to make that purchase or consider the brand, then they know who to go to.
Great example. I mean, one of the things I find strange with podcasting is, I remember previous podcasts I did for quite a few years. One of the things I do is I train journalists to create videos on their smartphones. And I made a podcast, in the journalism world. And at a certain point I stopped, and it's partly because I was just traveling so much and I just was struggling to keep it up. But I would find, you never quite know who's listening. So you would be at a conference in Helsinki and people would come up to you and say, like, well, when's the next episode? Whereas, sometimes on YouTube, you get a little bit more kind of reaction and comments and that kind of thing. But at the same time, the audience, that even if they don't necessarily always email you or contact you, are very loyal, very kind of engaged, like you say. So it's a very different format to some of the kind of quick, like you say, like Instagram and all those kind of platforms. Bring it back to kind of pulling the two together. So, you talked about your expertise with, putting courses together, and back in the day, in the days of dinosaurs, when, you were out there doing your early online marketing, you've built up this kind of expertise. You've done digital marketing. Now, you have an agency and you're producing podcasts for major organizations. Pulling on all that knowledge and dragging it, out of your brain. For a lot of people, if you are somebody maybe has an expertise, maybe you're a coach, maybe you have online courses, whatever it is, and you're thinking, okay, I want to come up with some kind of content strategy to bring people into my world and build the credibility and hopefully get them to buy some things off me. If you were sitting down with one of those people, having a coffee, and they said, look, I know my stuff, I've got great content here, I need to work out a strategy. Like, where do I put this content? What do I do? What would be the kind of the main points you would make to them?
Okay, well, I think firstly, it's an audit in terms of what kind of content they currently have and how that maps to what I call the pump and funnel marketing model. So that's another marketing model that I came up with a year or two ago, because I had this 4H model. I actually extended it into 6Hs, but that's another story. And what I wanted to do was apply the various types of content marketing into a different part of the marketing funnel, because obviously you tend to start off with, if you think about it traditionally, awareness, consideration, conversion, loyalty, advocacy. So you can apply different forms of content to those different areas. Awareness is where I applied the hero content. Consideration is where I applied the help content. Hub content I actually put outside the funnel, because that's where people go once they're not quite ready to buy from you, but it's a way that you can keep brand top of mind so that when they are ready, then they'll come back to you. Heart content was the additional H that I brought in, was the content that I described for the product pages, the sales pages. I added two other H's called happy and human content, which is about once someone becomes a customer, making them extremely satisfied, and then hopefully turning them into brand advocates. So I would do some kind of audit on where their existing content was, going back to your question, to see if maybe they had a lot of hub type content, but maybe they were short of a big hero piece of content, or answering all the kinds of questions that are appropriate for their type of industry, to see where the gaps are and the opportunities are to actually create new content in the future, and to maybe create a year-long plan to create the content that plugged the gaps and made the funnel a lot more slippery for their target market.
Great. So in other words, I think I like the idea of, focusing on the mix of content as well. It's not just a blob of content, it's all these different ingredients together. I suppose it's like
it's
a meal,
the purpose behind
the right
it as
mix.
opposed to the medium. Yeah.
And bring you up to date now with, obviously we've been through a strange time in the world with COVID, which has meant that, lots of businesses, organizations are doing things differently and perhaps a lot more remotely. Where do you see things going just generally in the kind of whole like knowledge industry, in the kind of online marketing space? This change that's happened now, do you think it will change anything? Is there stuff we're going to have to do differently going forwards? Because, as you say, you've seen changes over the years. What's your prediction for going forwards?
I think the most challenging thing to do that probably hasn't been cracked yet completely is a hybrid training situation. I've had a look at a couple of your videos, Mark, and you've done a wonderful job of it, making your training from an online basis very engaging, multiple cameras, great sound, lots of things going on, showing your phone at the same time. And that's a wonderful thing to do. And I think many online trainers do a horrific job of delivering static, monotone content with poor audio quality and bad internet connection. So that obviously can be improved to begin with. But I think the next stage to really get right, some people are going to want to do face-to-face. And it's that step to actually attempt to engage an online audience and an in-person audience at the same time. And there are many great pieces of software out that probably haven't completely cracked it yet, partly because online probably deserves and requires a slightly different experience compared with in person, because in person you have an opportunity to speak to speakers directly, engage on a one-on-one basis and have drinks with fellow attendees as well. So you're not necessarily trying to mirror exactly the same experience. It's deciding how to create the best possible experience for online and the best possible experience for in-person, and where is appropriate to marry both parts together. And I would say probably not all parts, but be selective in the parts that well together more effectively.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there, because I deal with a lot of really big training organizations around the world, and the conversation everybody's having is, the online stuff's actually been working pretty well. Mm-hmm. So now we have to consider, when we do face-to-face, because people still have a desire for face-to-face, do we just do the normal training, or, do we do some online and then we have a big get together and do it offline, or do we have to go somewhere where the location is really important? So, yeah, I think that the questions and the conversations you mentioned there are definitely the kind of things that people will be mentioning. I'd like to sort of sum up, your expertise, your journey. You've gone through all these different things. You've worked with corporate, you worked with different organizations. If you had to do a TED Talk based on your life career, and when you do a TED Talk, they normally say there's got to be one main big idea, one kind of thrust, that if people took away that one thing, what would it be? If I had to stick you on a stage right now with no preparation and say, what would your central message be? What would it be?
I would say it has to be distillation of ideas. TED's talks in general are very good at that, in that they try to make sure that every talk is about 15 minutes long or so. And I've struggled with that. I've wanted to deliver everything or so much information in a single session. And at the end of the day, people aren't going to remember most of what you say. But if you can give people a concept or a model of what you do, and you make it really memorable and relevant and relatable, then they're much more likely to take it away. So I would encourage anyone watching to try to distill what they do as the main part of their life into a 3 or 4 step process or a very simple model, and encourage them to think that if they aren't able to do that, or they think they can't do that, then perhaps they haven't even achieved mastery at what they specialize in yet. I'm not claiming mastery yet, but I'm working towards that, and everyone is. But I think the concept of passing on information is greatly aided by simplicity and building models that people can change themselves and apply themselves in the future. So I would try and encourage people to do that.
That was a very good answer. I'm not sounding surprised, because obviously I was expecting a good answer, but that's a very good answer. Because I think, we talk about getting ideas out of your head. Training is one thing, because people often ask things you wouldn't think of, and you have to kind of figure it out. Mm-hmm. And also you then have to think about what I'm actually trying to get across, what's the essence, what can I leave out, and all that. And I haven't written a book yet, I'm ashamed to say, but I think you have. I think the other one is, writing books and blogs is another way where people get things out of their heads, because when you do that, suddenly, like with your H example, where you kind of said, well, actually, I think think I need another ratio or two in this, otherwise it's not going to work. And if you hadn't gone through that process of trying to structure it, you might not have realized actually there are missing ingredients.
I wrote a book for a client in the last 4 months, actually.
Oh, come on, you're just showing off now. You're making me feel really bad. I mean, I've had so many people recently just sent me, like, today I got a message from somebody saying, I've just finished my book, and you're now saying you knocked it off in 4. So do you want to say what it's called?
It's not to show you the book really necessarily. It's just the process, I guess, that I use. So, I'll tell you, the title of it is SEO in 2022. So I interviewed 66 of the world's leading SEOs, and I created a video series, a podcast series, and then from that content had it transcribed and had it completely rewritten, and then wrote around that and used that to produce a 329-page book. So you could say it's wow, cheating a little bit, but I think the key thing to do if you're creating content like that is not just to take the transcript and publish it as a book. That just doesn't read well. People obviously write a book or write very differently to how they speak. You have to completely and utterly edit it, and that's the tough part.
Yeah, of course, now with like AI and things like I use Otter.ai to transcribe, it does make it more easy. So
it's a great starting point.
I mean that's something I'm going to transcribe all the podcasts and maybe turn that into a book. And I know I'm taking up a lot of your time here, but there's one thing just based on the fact that you're clearly somebody who thinks about these things. And one of the things that I, again, trying to be kind of distill is the people who have success with these kind of media, whether they're, video or whatever it is, it's about that connection. It's a word I've used before, that in a sense, what you're trying to do is you can't stand in front of somebody, but you can build a connection, and you can also build connection at scale. If what would be the thing that you think most helps somebody, if you're putting content out there, build connection with your audience?
You're never going to be brilliant to start out with. You have to get started, obviously. I've recorded, I don't know, certainly over 600 podcast episodes, webinars, those kinds of things. And I'm a lot better than I was. I'm nowhere near perfect at all. I think you need to try to improve at what you do. I mean, I've edited that number of podcast episodes as well. So I've heard myself and sigh and take big breaths into the microphone and make plosive noises and things like that in audio, and improved a bit because of that. But I'm not necessarily even... once you become reasonably good at doing things like speaking into a microphone, I mean, I highly recommend a dynamic microphone to start with, 3 or 4 inches from it, speaking past the microphone and getting comfortable with using the microphone. But once you start doing that, and this applies to delivering a speech in person as well, video as well, the actual quality of the content that you're producing in terms of what the audience hears. Once you get past all those technical things, I think the key thing to really appreciate is everyone is a grain of sand in the universe. And no matter how important you think the audience is, in the grand scheme of things, in the scheme of things that are really, really important to you in life, it's not that important. So don't get stressed about it. It's no issue whatsoever. Once you truly get comfortable with that mindset that, in the grand scheme of things, it's not important. So do the best you can at just conveying what you want to say, what you want the audience to hear, and you'll continue to get better over time.
So in a sense, get the technology out of the way so it's not a distraction for you or anybody else, and then get out of your own way and not take it yourself too seriously and get stressed about it.
Get comfortable with delivering your message into the technology so the technology doesn't matter. So it's not to say the technology doesn't matter. It's to say, I've got a 6-step process, for example, for publishing a book, or from starting a podcast to publishing a book. And it starts off with creating an audio podcast and just focusing on that to begin with, because I advocate people to get comfortable with audio before switching on to video, and then moving on to live streaming, and then summits, and then perhaps a book after that as well. And if they master each stage of the process, then suddenly they won't have to worry about it. But you can only not worry about it if you're a bit comfortable with it. You can put it to the back of your mind.
So, by the way, you've got to stop saying interesting things or I'm never going to let you go. So you're saying that actually you have a process in in the sense that, yes, there are all these options, but you think there's an order that works best to go in.
Yeah. I mean, just very quickly, start off with basic audio-only equipment. Get a microphone like the Samsung Q2U. Get comfortable with using that and speaking into it and knowing how to improve your voice. Once you've done that, perhaps you can afford to spend a little more money on a better microphone and a camera, and turn on your camera and perhaps do pre-recorded videos. Once you get comfortable looking into the video, doing your intros, smiling a little bit, engaging with the person that's actually watching your video, then start live streaming. Don't start live streaming before you've done that, because you can't do things like engage with the chat. You end up forgetting about the microphone, or going too far away, or not delivering the best quality video. Then you can perhaps put it together by hosting a virtual summit, getting the people that you've interviewed on your podcast to participate in a virtual summit. And then there's the opportunity to transcribe all that. If you've categorized everything beforehand and thought about the content, there's an immediate opportunity to turn that into a book.
Well, you're an encyclopedia of knowledge. I should leave probably about 10 minutes for you to go through all the places where people can connect with you and all the sort of things that you offer. But if somebody wants to find out more about you, what you do, what kind of places should they go?
Sure, thank you. Mark, it's been a pleasure to be on with you. It's great to have a discussion. Hopefully we can do something somewhere else another day. I'll share two places. One is LinkedIn. Just search David Bain on LinkedIn. And the other is, I'm in the middle of doing some initial research in developing a course called Podcast Presentation Skills. So I've got the domain name podcastpresentationskills.com. That is actually a survey at the moment, so I'd appreciate a little bit of feedback in terms of what podcasts you don't like listening to, why you do like listening to, and what kind of skills you'd like to learn. So I've got 3 questions as part of that survey, so if that's still up, I'd appreciate anyone sharing that information with me.
Yeah. So head over to that site. Of course, don't put the name of this podcast down, okay? It's like, which one's got a terrible presenter? Oh, that Mark Egan, idiot. It's just like terrible. He keeps umming, and everybody has their tics. One of my tics is I keep saying now before I start a sentence. And when I'm listening back, I go, oh no. But you said that you're willing to come back on, and I'm going to keep you to that, because I've got a million other questions, but I think possibly you have a life outside of this, so I should let you go. But it's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate your insights, being generous with your expertise, and I think possibly by the next time we speak, you can find another H to add to your formula. So we'll come back and find out what that is. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can catch up soon.
Great to be on with you, Mark.
If you want to get started showing up on video and sharing your expertise, head over to markeganvideo.com to access some of my free training. Don't forget to join the Knowledge Industry group on Facebook, and if you want to connect, head to markeganvideo.com.